Sciences in the Arab States Cluster, Office for Egypt and Sudan. I'd like to welcome Dr. Zaki Khouri, the Senior Digital Development Specialist at World Bank. I'd like to welcome Mr. Mohammed Ibrahim Al-Nahi, the Operation NHC Manager at BP UAE, and Mr. Nader Sabri, the ex-CEO and founder of Times 5 Global. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome, Sultan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Sultan.
So, guys, COVID-19 created a huge shift in the economy. People did not predict what's happening in the world. Suddenly, after the retail crunch in the beginning of 2020, end of 2019, the world faced a huge, tremendous change with a new virus hitting the economy, hitting the health of people, creating a huge, dramatic fall internationally, affecting economies, bringing huge enterprises to bankruptcy, enterprises that lived more than 100 years, shifting focus of countries from a country to a country and from a globalization to more decentralized economies. From this point of view, I'd like to address my first question to Dr. Ghaith. I'd like to know, Dr. Ghaith, what is the role of science and technology in the future post-COVID-19 economics? And what about the aspires knowledge economics and societies? If you can elaborate more on this point, please, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sultan, for this introduction. Indeed, as you rightfully said, the COVID-19 crisis has changed lots of our, shall I say, views and approaches to many of the current and future challenges. And actually, many new challenges have emerged. Going back to the question you raised, what is the role of sciences, etc.? Definitely, well, science technologies has been always central in humankind, shall I say, advancement and change in societies. However, in many of our parts of the world, particularly in the developing world, science was not exactly looked at as a priority in many areas because it was competing with other priorities such as poverty and employment, etc., and so on. However, this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has proved to all of us the importance of science in advancing and addressing these challenges. The whole world now is waiting for this scientist or these scientists or science in general to come with a solution to this pandemic. We are all waiting for this vaccine, with this cure, this whatever. So the silver lining of this, shall I say, big problem is that it did really alert the whole world to the importance of science and that we all should embrace science and technology to give us solutions, to address current problems, to address emerging problems, particularly in various areas, be it in trade, be it in production, in food security. So science is no more a luxury. What can science provide us? Basically, it can, of course, we can use science technologies to address current problems in agriculture, in industries, etc., and so on. Evidence-based solutions or science-based policies are also needed. They are now more and more needed. We are also facing a new era about new technologies such as artificial intelligence. It's another major area that is emerging now, and it will gain more and more, shall I say, area in our future societies. Also, the science technologies can help us in adopting and embracing a more inclusive policies to include the marginalized. For example, now ICT is being used to address issues of illiteracy, of small micro enterprises, etc. And when we talk, so basically, the whole view in the post-COVID era, science in the post-COVID economies and societies at large, science now will be or is already central and should be given and will be given more, shall I say, attention in terms of investments, in terms of policies. And we see that the future is for science, be it in various spheres of the economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leith, for your answer. And actually, through science will play a big role in changing what's happening in COVID-19. But if it's placed on the right direction, the right path. From this point of view, I'd like to address a question to Dr. Zaki. Following up with what Dr. Leith said, I'd like to get your overview on how the economic policies will look like after COVID-19. What will be the role of the international organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF in shaping up these policies? Please feel free to give us your overview on this topic, please.
Thank you so much. So let me start by defining a little bit the boundaries of the impact of the crisis where we are living right now. So it's absolutely there is a global economic crisis that are happening not just from a health perspective. And to quantify this, what we are predicting based on the modeling that happened just in June right now, we are predicting that 5.2% contraction in global GDP in 2020 alone. So this is just in order really to see the magnitude. This is huge. If I go back a little bit, a few years, this is the deepest global recession in 8 decades. And it's even amplified when we go granular a little bit to see region by region, or even not every single region that has the same contraction. If we are seeing, for example, Europe and Central Asia, it's minus 7.3%. It's worse when it is coming to Latin America and the Caribbean. It's minus 9%, with Brazil minus 10% just for the 2020. Middle East, North Africa, we are seeing minus 6.6%. The least is Egypt with minus 2.2%, but when it is coming to Saudi is minus 5.7%. And let me end just in order really to draw the picture as a whole. When it is coming really to South Asia, there is a downgrade, but also there is a contraction of minus 8.2%, with India minus 9% predicted. So sorry to bombard you with all these numbers, but this will draw for us the picture of the real impact on the economy for basically 3 or 4 months. So we are talking about a completely different world. We are talking about a storm, an economic storm, but also a humanitarian storm that is happening. And this storm is really making even things much difficult this time to have the long-term growth reboundary, like what you say, because it shakes some fundamentals. For example, we are seeing a huge uncertainty. Everyone is asking what will happen. And this is not good for the investment. It's automatically, it brings a plunge in the investment environment and climate. There is an erosion even of the human capital. When you have a huge percentage of population that are getting out to unemployment, let's say that this is not good. And finally, it's really about a complete breaking of the notion of a global value chain, for example, which we are seeing it slowing down of trade, even on the supply linkages. So this is really a storm, an economic storm that is impacting, let's say, us individually and nationwide. So what is the role really of an international organization, especially the financial organization like the World Bank, IMF, and others? I will give I will illustrate, let's say, the point by giving what is the role of the World Bank in such kind of crisis, or for the immediate term in dealing with the crisis to maybe the short term. Absolutely, it's really about financing and liquidity. And this is where, let's say, most of the nations are hit hard. It doesn't really differentiate between emerging markets or developing markets. It's really hitting everyone right now. And I'm talking here about financing that will really boost the nations in order really to go toward more resilient economy, I would say. We heard, I'm sure all of you participants or even speakers, my colleagues on the same panel, we heard the resilience as a term that has been floating around big time. This is true because resilience, which means that not just in order really to absorb the shock, but also to make sure that there is an increase of coverage for safety nets. Because Dr. Gates, for example, mentioned inclusion. The people who are suffered the most are the vulnerable population. The least or the smallest size of SMEs that is within the market. So the more your scale is down and size is down, the more vulnerable you are during the crisis. There is also the need for this liquidity in order to provide trade finance, to secure the supply chain one more time, or to rebuild it in a way. There is also let's say, 60% of the business market needs really to support and increase of the working capital they need for every day, which has been dry for some time, not in terms of supply, but also in terms of demand. So it is breaking completely the chain here. Look, I don't want to be pessimistic, but the clear issue is that we are really facing a crisis that already been floating most of the delayed reform that some of the countries were supposed to really take it in a very, very accelerated way. Such kind of raising income, enhancing standards of quality of life. Not every country, like in the region where we are living right now, but there are a lot of inequality that already floated, and this crisis already been amplifying it in a way that is visible more and more. So, just in order really to conclude the picture as a whole, so it's not just the international organization that are pushing liquidity, but the recipient of the liquidity, which are the national policymakers, are also facing one of the challenges that is unique. The biggest challenge is that they do have too much priorities between their hands that they have to deal with right now. Not only from the healthcare situation and the social services that needs to be pushed around, but the core public services is completely in a different business model, which means that it has to be delivered. If we will continue the public services, it needs to be delivered suddenly 100% digitally, which is a lot of government are not really ready for this. There is a lot of talk about the movement toward digitalization, but very few of them already went through a transformation, a complete transformation. And not only that, but also there is a responsibility of these governments in order really to maintain the private sector, because at the end of the day, private sector is the one who is creating the jobs and in the same time creating the business that will create the jobs there. And finally, it's really about, let's say, the huge, I would say, potential human capital that needs to be reskilled completely, because it will never be the same in a post, let's say, a post-COVID crisis. Let me stop here because there is room also for my other colleagues to give, but I will end by saying is that some of the key policy reform where international organizations like the World Bank is trying really to support and be the trusted advisor to some of the government, not a consultant, but a trusted advisor, is really how you speed up the resolution of dispute. You said it right, Sultan. The biggest crisis that we have is that the bankruptcies that are there, the dispute between partners, the suddenly a shock of the business model and even the continuity of such kind of business. So resolution of disputes is key. Quick win to be fixed and to be reformed, in addition to the regulatory barriers that are really reducing the efficiency within the system. But also like what we are seeing right now, and we started to see it in GCC especially, but not only especially, but across the world, is that there is a lot of changes happening. Name it a reschedule of government, name it a appointment of a new government. It's basically, we are moving toward a new form of governance that is more agile, which is the biggest reform that is happening so far. Consolidation of ministries, focus on quality of services, optimization of the costs in order to raise quality. I think I give you a little bit the picture right now.
Thank you.
What is the size of this crisis?
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks. Thank you. I have my question now to Mr. Muhammad. Following what Dr. Zaki and Dr. Gait said, the oil and gas had a dramatic drop in the year 2020. Then it had the shock. Corona came to the world. This affected the oil and gas industry badly. Do you think this will boost investments towards clean energy in the coming future? Will it have a positive impact on this field? Please. The table
thank
is
you,
yours.
Sultan.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I think looking back towards the end of last year, when we saw the OPEC Plus and the OPEC Plus consortium kind of fall apart, and started with Saudi Arabia and Russia started increasing the production along with their allies, and that led to an increase in supply in the market. And the second challenge, like you said, with the COVID coming down, with an increase in supply, with COVID, you had a drop, not a decrease, but a sudden drop in demand with the travel stopped everywhere. So it was a dual shock to all the oil and gas industry, and that presented kind of a huge challenge. Now, looking forward, I think there's a lot of lessons learned for the companies, for organizations, and for governments, because a lot of the governments around the world, they rely a lot on primarily, this is oil and gas as either their major income or as providing jobs and sustaining the economy. So looking at the socio-economic path forward, definitely if current fossil fuels are not going to be reliable for the long term. And now with countries and organizations having set to go back to the new normal, let's hope they have the opportunity now to build back better after COVID-19. some organizations might decide to build with the exact same model they had pre-COVID-19, but we hope that they take a look at their strategies, governments take a look at their policies to build back better and build back for the long term. And the long term is not through fossil fuels, like I said, that will be only a small percentage. You need to change the business model. You need to head towards lower carbon, because the dual challenge for all these companies is how can I meet the world's energy demand, but at the same time with less emissions. Solar and renewables and wind energy and biofuels are one part of it. But if you look at all around the world, solar and wind are the cheapest that they've ever been right now in so many markets that they can compete with the existing grid. So a lot of companies and a lot of governments, it's easy for them to revive industries post-COVID. They can create value, they can create jobs, but the public policies must align together. And you're going to need partnerships. This is one thing that also COVID-19 has taught us, that no one can do everything alone. How much we depend on one another around the world to make the world go forward. So at the end, you need to have a lower carbon footprint. It is the most sustainable answer and solution, and it's the best bet going forward. So it's the safest bet, we'll put it that way. Thank you.
Sultan?
I think you're on
Yeah.
mute,
Yeah.
Sultan.
Yeah.
Mr. Nader,
Yeah.
I'll be a little bit broad on my question.
Go for it.
Yes, I'd like to get your overview on what do you see coming or going to happen in the post-COVID-19 environment. What's happening in the world? Nobody knows. So I want to hear from your background, your thoughts and your ideas on what's happening in the earth now in 2020.
Sure. Well, as a friend of mine put it, he said, I'd like to erase 2020 from the calendar completely. I think that we could all empathize on a human level on what that really means. But stepping back, I'm going to give you a rather counterintuitive perspective that I started talking about on April 1st of all funny dates. And it was funny when I started talking, I said, I thought this morning that coronavirus was an April Fool's joke, but unfortunately it's not. And here we are sitting in a reality that we may not necessarily understand where it's going. And so how that came about was a lot of my clients and a lot of the entrepreneurs and Fortune 500 companies I work with, a lot of my followers asked me, what's next? What's the prediction? What are we going to do in a post-COVID-19 environment? And so I gave them two basic answers. The first, most strangest one is if you go to the fundamentals of strategy and you want to understand what to do when there's uncertainty, you actually do nothing. And for most people, that's a very freaky answer to receive when you're in extreme uncertainty. And the reason being, and I'll put it into a very powerful analogy for you. Imagine that you're walking in a forest and there's nothing but 100% fog. And so if I take one step forward, I don't know if I'm going to hit a tree. I don't know if I'm going to fall into a hole. I don't know if I'm going to fall off a cliff. I don't know if a grizzly bear is going to jump out of the blue and eat me because I can't see him, right? There's nothing but complete fog in front of me. And the only way to handle that is you need to stop. You need to stop and wait. Even with 3% visibility in a completely foggy situation is almost like a night and day difference. But we don't see it like that because we got too accustomed to doing the things the way we were doing it before. Everybody who was trying to place some kind of a prediction on what the future would look like was all using historical information, historical thinking. As the old saying goes, you can't solve a problem by thinking about it the same way you got into it. So how do we change our thinking? And that's where the second part, which is the talk I did on April 1st. We had about 1,100 people join because we were extremely uncertain about what's about to happen. So to break it down into just a really simple discussion, what's going on is what I call the revolutionary evolutionary cycle. And what happens is you go up this thing, you evolve, and then an event takes place, and then a revolution happens, okay? Now, revolution, we're not literally talking about a revolution, we're just talking about a life or global changing event. And that event are not things like the economic crisis of 2008, 2001, 1983. If you go back into history, this is unprecedented. This actually aligns with none of them. These are all evolutionary movements. We are now entered a revolutionary cycle, and that is why we're in shock. Now, what does a revolutionary cycle mean? The key characteristic is a change in rules. There are old rules that are going to become obsolete, and new rules are going to replace them. One of the new rules is exactly what we're doing at this moment. If we were in pre-COVID-19, we would be all sitting probably in a fancy 5-star hotel hosted by somebody who has sponsored us, and we'd have the pleasure of connecting. But because that isn't the case, a new rule has been written where it doesn't actually matter anymore, which is quite brilliant in many ways. I wouldn't have had the pleasure of meeting people on the panel, like Dr. Ghaith and Dr. Zaki and His Excellency Mohammed. We probably would have never connected if it wasn't for the post-COVID-19 environment, right? And so new rules are being created. And I believe, to close off on that point, and this is the strangest comment I'm going to give you, is I believe that the largest prosperity development machine of our time is right now. We do not see it because we're blinded, because we're walking through that forest with 100% fog, but we are in that prosperity development machine right now. How we think, what we do is going to determine everything on the other side of it when we get out. That's all from my side, Sultan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nader. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I'm coming back to you, Dr. Ghaith. A lot of governments define their SDGs, their Sustainable Development Goals. They approved it. They had plans to 2025, some of them to 2030. But now, with post-COVID-19, where do you think it's going? What's going to happen? Will they frame it again? They look at it again? What are the plans now? What are governments are doing now? I know that the governments are in shock, but I want to see and I want to listen from your experience. What are the policies and procedures governments are taking now to reframe or redesign these SDGs?
Thank you, Mr. Sultan, for the question. Indeed, now just going to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. What are the SDGs? The SDGs were set by, is what all the governments of the world agreed about in 2015 to achieve by 2030. And basically, we had 17 goals, 169 targets, and so many other indicators. And basically, if I might summarize them, they represented the aspiration of the world, what the world aspired to look like by 2030. And there was this big slogan of leaving no one behind, be it for poverty, unemployment, and all other social things, and etc. And then the COVID-19 came, and with all the, shall I say, the shocks, uncertainties that came with that are coming with it, new emerging challenges, etc., and all what was said by me and by colleagues that also contributed to this webinar. So, just going back, philosophically speaking, the SDGs, leaving no one behind, addressing poverty, addressing environmental issues, international cooperation, they are even much more relevant now than before. If they were, and they have been always relevant, but now with the crisis, they became more relevant. Definitely, we witnessed, and we are witnessing a kind of a setback. Because at the beginning of 2020, at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, there were high aspirations that this year, this decade will be how we can materialize the SDGs, etc. But we are witnessing a setback. The whole world has been shut down in a way or another for the last 3-4 months. And so we are now facing a compounded challenge, the challenges of the past, as well as the current new challenges. Actually, this even has a threefolded, because we, shall I say, phase. We have also to protect whatever we have achieved before, try to compensate for the setback, at least in temporal terms, as well as to face the new challenges. Issues of, now we have issues of diversification, for example, issues of food security, many issues. The way we look at many things are changing. And concept of sustainability as a whole, which has been the basic, shall I say, driving principle behind Sustainable Development Goals. Food security, we're always looking at food security that from the perspective, as long as you have the money to buy it, etc., and so on, from a global perspective. But this crisis has alerted all of us to the importance of agriculture, importance of having security, maybe in the old traditional way, but it has been challenging our way of looking at it. Economic global cooperation, again, which is one of the basic SDGs, has been also challenged. And we've, as you mentioned and other colleagues mentioned, that we have been witnessing less globalization and more decentralization. Actually, many of the countries became introverts rather than open to international cooperation, because everybody wants to protect their own constituencies and own people. So this is happening, ironically speaking, while the COVID-19 itself has no boundaries. It crossed all boundaries of the world, all nationalities, developed, underdeveloped countries, developing, etc. Everybody is suffering. So there is a big irony here that we have, or dichotomy that we have really to address. So the basic point here that our old priorities, yes, the principles stay the same, they are more relevant, but we have to rethink of our approaches, and we have to be much more innovative in that. And I mentioned in my first intervention the role of science and technology, the evidence-based solutions, inclusion, etc., and so on. We are now another major issue that I wanted to say that about the ethics. Also, the SDGs were based on some certain ethics and practices, and some ethic. Now, even this ethic, some of these ethical challenges, and may I say sometimes such as ethical tools that we created, for example, the copyrights issues. Who owns the copyright of, if somebody comes with a cure for COVID-19? Can we as human societies allow this to be within the hands of some companies, certain companies? Shouldn't it be open? The issue of trade, openness of trade, and of course the ethics and the rules and regulations that emerged that were based on these ethics or global understandings. These are other things. The ethics of science is another thing, and we are talking about the artificial intelligence, and there's now a huge debate. To what extent can we allow that? To what extent can we be immune from that? And to what extent can we use that ethic? And this applies to various, shall I say, spheres of areas of science. So along with that, I will not take more time. I know we have very limited time. So as a conclusion, SDGs are definitely much more relevant now in principle. As I started, they represented, and they still represent, the aspirations of humanity, how to advance, how to eliminate poverty, how to include everybody, how to protect our environments, our waters, how to utilize technologies. Again, the SDGs have been labeled by many before the COVID-19 crisis as an agenda of science. Now I think it's becoming even more evident, as I said in my first intervention. But we have to rethink of the approaches. All of that is not easy. As my colleagues pointed to the issues of uncertainty, we are really Even all these figures that we make and estimates about economic growth or recessions or depressions, all these figures are changing by the day. The numbers of COVID are increasing by hundreds of thousands per day, and hence the impact is actually becoming more compound. So we are shooting at a moving target. As one of my colleagues just said, we are walking in a dark jungle or forest, and we don't know what will happen tomorrow. So the uncertainty even puts more challenge on us. So one of the major things that I would like to stress that we have to we can maybe put more efforts in crisis management programs, projects, change management. If we don't know exactly where we are heading, at least we have to learn as societies and put priority how to manage change, and then gradually together explore together with our societies as international communities, as responsible for international economies in the post-era. We really have to learn how to manage this crisis and to manage the change that is imminently coming after the COVID-19, of course, and while, as I said, keeping the spirit of the SDGs and elaborating it in it so it can really meet the emerging challenges. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for your answer. I'll move now to Dr. Zaki. Dr. Zaki, pre-COVID-19, people were focusing on a full transmission towards technology, AI, blockchain, everything will be electronic. But what happened after COVID-19 showed some different aspects. Huge companies that were huge technology companies showed a huge drop, like Airbnb. They came to public, they announced that what they built in 12 years went in days. So my question is, do you think this will stay the same, or there'll be a major shift in technology approach to make it cope with any future dramatic problems such as viruses, pandemics, any natural effects, or even wars? So my question is, do you think the technology will be driving the same path, or there will be a huge shift to make a change in the international approach in the use of technology?
Thank you, Mr. Sultan. Let me say is that technology is a tool, and technology changing every day. So allow me to shift from just focusing on the technology to digital transformation. And I have to say is that COVID propelled our understanding and absorption and adoption of the notion of digital transformation. Back to what Nader said is that everyone is like relaxed completely to have a conference call, a virtual conference call, not conference call, but conference connection right now. It doesn't matter if it is on Zoom, on Teams, on WebEx, or others. It's not the technology. It's just the shift of mindset. I have kids. Suddenly, they discovered, although they are native of technology, they are digital generation, but it took them I would say, a couple of weeks in order to shift at a 100% level of e-learning, completely e-learning, e-schooling. Suddenly, they found themselves is that not only they have to post or receive the information, but they have to exchange, interact, and consume the knowledge digitally, which is a completely different business model. Think about it as a business model. We already experience a transfer of funds. We received our salaries, 100% of them in different countries. Any transfer of funds from government to the citizens or to businesses happen electronically. It's very familiar right now. I'm relaxed as an individual when I'm interacting with such kind of services. this is what I mean by a shift of paradigm, a shift of mindset. So back to the notion of even in times of uncertainty, there are positive things. Yes, as a nation now, not as an individual, it's very, very important to stabilize the situation. I have to really be careful in what steps are moving forward or taking care. But I shouldn't be stagnant. I should stabilize, but not stagnant. And another thing, which is, name it, sorry, Dr. Gates, sorry, Nader, I have to differ with you, is that it's not only stabilize, but also I need to continue exploring how I can really move forward without exploring what's next or what's new, even though if the model that I'm predicting or what I'm trying really to address will change, but it's okay. Life is changing every day, and the crisis is accelerating this change and shouldn't stop us from exploring. And that's what here it's fundamental in terms of crisis. And back again to the business, which needs to be the DNA of business. It's always exploring opportunities and not stopping. When the market is up, you are not really going aggressive. It's when the market is down that you are, as an investor, you go aggressively. And that's exactly the time. I'm not advising anyone to go aggressive, but in order really to explore new ways, new opportunities. So where are these opportunities? Mohammed, for example, mentioned, despite the fact of let's say, the plunge in oil prices, but still because of the drive of diversification of the energy sources, we are seeing really an increase, a spike increase in really exploring renewable energy. And the drop in the prices of megawatt, let's say, unit by, let's say, production, and even the distribution itself. You are exploring optimization of the network to make sure that your distribution is at a high quality with the lowest price, and so on. So my point is that there are always opportunities where we can explore, let's say, the next level of opportunity. So what is the problem? Sultan, you are completely right. So what happened to the platform economy and some of the companies that are already basing their business model on the digital, on the technology itself? But some sectors is basically are not compatible with the era where we are or what will happen next. Tourism, for example, we will explore things, but it's absolutely transport and tourism. It will be a huge revolution. We need to reimagine how it is right now, and based on it, there will be more opportunities that are coming. Another thing that we saw, but we don't talk about it because we are accepting it naturally, is what happened with the healthcare. Is that some of us already are suffering from some of the other diseases than corona. They should stop? No. What happened is that digital transformation allowed them to explore some of the telehealth, to take some appointments completely, to already adopt the e-filings, e-medical files, and really see the importance of it. So it's a mindset that we are bit by bit exploring. So what are the opportunities other than this? Let's take some fundamentals here. It's absolutely what happened is that we are not, the opportunity is not in technology. The opportunity is the data and data flow. So it's really about the modern digital infrastructure. This is where we are heading more. For the last decade, there was a lot of investment from some of the companies in data centers, cloud computing, and other. But now it's, again, It's a right. It's everyone, vulnerable population or wealthy or SME or a big company. You really need such kind of modern digital infrastructure to be maintained at a quality level that will allow you to do business remotely. We know by now. There is another thing, is that not only in the connectivity and the data economy infrastructure, but also there is a lot of opportunities in, name it a merger, but in digital sense, I would say in interoperability, by bringing platforms together, by consolidating the services under one umbrella, by recreating retail to be not just e-commerce or e-shopping, but basically to create the idea of a mall digitally, as an immersive technology is really, and the immersive experience is really moving forward. So how to really democratize it in a way. So the first or the companies, even SME, that will jump in and get the opportunity, definitely forget about the normal economic, let's say, or shock of an L-shaped economic growth, what we name it deep steep, which means that it's a drop, a sudden drop, and then flattening down. We really need to have a rebound, a V-shaped rebound quickly to allow us in order really to bring a new business model, using transformation in a different way, and exploring new opportunities. I will end by saying three things. The biggest opportunity, no matter what sector, what scale, for SME or others, it will be around three things that needs to happen during this exploration period. The knowledge transfer will be key, because you really need to find knowledge and find the experience. What are you doing? Is this something that I can really practice? Is this something that I can better adjust? The second area is focus on fiscal, which means that guys, it's basically, we are in a time where we really need to optimize our fiscal, either by bringing new financing or even by managing our own financing. And so, finally, it's really about the emphasis on quality and on the services themselves. The type of service needs to be quality, no matter what the business model behind is. And this is what will bring the value, and this is what will bring, let's say, the added potential of profit, I would say, to companies. So maybe some platform companies are suffering right now, but definitely not because of the digital transformation. It's on high gear right now, digital transformation.
Thank you, Dr. Zaki. We'll move now to Mr. Muhammad. Mr. Muhammad, my question is, there are many organizations which have been badly affected during COVID-19, while on the other hand, there are some which have responded well. As Dr. Zaki said, what are your views on business continuity for organization going forward?
Thank you, Sultan. I think we've learned a lot about organizations and governments over the last 4 months. We've learned about their crisis management capabilities. We've learned about the capabilities they have in their organization. We've learned how effective the communication is from the top leadership, either in a government or an organization, all the way down. And we've learned that there's many other factors that we need to look into. For example, mental health is one of the issues which came out of this, and it shone a huge spotlight on that. So going back to what Dr. Zaki said, is you need a mindset shift. And what we've seen is a lot of the governments or organizations which have really have this mindset towards agility, towards delegating the decision making, towards moving fast. And that's the way to survive, especially during COVID, because as we saw over the last 4 months, and it's still happening right now, decisions need to be taken quick. And it all depends on what are your capabilities, what were the strategies before, and what's your business model. Because the business model that you had pre-COVID-19 is not the same business model that you're going to have probably after post-COVID-19. A lot of the organizations also, they need to stress test their business continuity plans. A lot of these issues which came up during COVID-19 haven't been thought of before. They haven't been discussed before. So haven't been discussed before. But in order for a company to survive, I think they need to change the way that they think. And if they become agile, they'll have an opportunity to survive. And that's not only in the way that they're organized, but definitely a lot of the organizations, I mean, they're laying off a lot of people. They realize that we don't have the correct business model going forward, but at the same time, offering flexibility for their employees. Two huge examples are Petrobras in Brazil, biggest oil and gas company there. They already announced from now that 50% of their staff are going to work from home permanently. And you have companies like Twitter, which has let their employees choose. They can choose to work from home permanently going forward. So the mindset shift is happening. The mindset shift is there, and the business models are changing. And this presents new opportunities for companies due to the bureaucracy, due to policies which prevented them from having their business model. And what Dr. Zaki talked about, the digital opportunities. Yes, the digital opportunities are there, and they're there to be leveraged so that companies can take advantage of these moving forward in the future. And we'll see totally different business models and new opportunities in so many different sectors going forward. Thanks.
Shukran, Muhammad. Thank you. Now that I have my last question to you is, different countries had different measures in dealing with COVID-19. Some practiced a full lockdown, others had a semi-lockdown, and the others just lived with COVID-19. Do you think the lockdown was the right move, putting in mind the effect it had on the economy?
I think, so answering this question for where we stand in the time of history, my answer is going to feel a little bit on the rough side. I think that the lockdown was required. I think many people agree with that. I think it also needed to be extended, actually, in many countries. You know, if we were to live a long, healthy life of, let's say, 80, 90 years old, and for 6 or 8, 9 months, and I know it sounds a bit extreme, but 6 to 8, 9 months of my life, I had to stay home to stay healthy and keep alive. That's a small investment to make. People are so short-sighted that they want to get out of their house within 5 minutes. It's not just to protect yourself, it's to protect everybody else around you. And this has been an excellent lesson in us understanding the human condition, right? Seeing how people are careless and some people care, how some people are extremely generous and how others are extremely selfish. The cracks are opening up and becoming very visible. You know, we're entering an era of a mega awakening, by the way. The truth of the world is opening up by no choice. Everybody who has hidden whatever truth that they've tried to hide is opening up and will continue to open up. This is one of the biggest advantages or blessings in disguise of what's happening. And to the point of a change in mindset, this is exactly what's going to help transform several people's mindsets. When no matter how ugly the truth may be, I believe personally that without the truth, there's no hope. And without hope, you cannot take hope and transform that into possibility. So even if the truth is a bit nasty, it's better that I know it now because I know how to respond to it. At least I have a fighting chance to respond to the truth, and I'm able to move myself and my family and my community and my country forward. I believe that, the other interesting thing is you'll see the difference in culture, how different countries have responded. So, on one extreme spectrum where countries have just shut down completely, and others that stayed open, like Taiwan, that had, I think, 500 total cases till today, yet they never shut down. They were producing, I believe it was like 1.5 million masks a month prior to, and they scaled up to 18 million and became the number one donator. They donated many masks to many countries, actually. So again, it goes back to the point where I was talking about, where when the cracks open up, you start to see what's really happening underneath the machine. Media is an excellent one. So I mean, forgive me on the comment, but I think the media has been one of the number one sources of a lot of problems for a lot of people. A lot of misinformation, a lot of misrepresentation, a lot of negativity, scaremongering. People have switched off. Their minds are overloaded, right? And so when you step back, you're going to ask yourself, what were these leaders doing? I think leadership is going to be redefined, how it works, how it functions. Prior to this, you can go to a fancy university and apply for a course called strategic leadership, and you come with your certificate and you show it to your boss and say, hey, I'm ready to lead. That I was surprised that it was working, but it was. New rules have changed. Leadership right now, if you've noticed, there's micro leadership. Micro leadership means that people in smaller communities have taken responsibility for themselves, and they're moving themselves forward. They're no longer responsive to leadership at higher levels, and it's going to grow. I'm not saying there's going to be a massive breakdown. What I'm saying was that is leadership at the top has been failing people at the bottom, and so they are now taking on micro leadership to lead themselves. And part of this concept, I call it, we've all heard the term back to basics, right? And I've seen the Dr. Zaki and Dr. Gaith talk about this, and as well as His Excellency Mohammed is on the topic, and about going back to basics. And so I've taken that term and actually rewired it, and I call it forward to basics. Okay, and forward basics meaning we are looking at the basics, but we're moving forward with technology, meaning we're already ahead. We're not going to go back to farming with our hands like we did like 100 years ago. No, we're going to go back to farming using technology that wasn't applied to it, that exists, and now it has utility, right? Imagine that there's this toolbox of technology that is available that hasn't been used or hasn't been utilized to its most ultimate level because the circumstances haven't allowed it. This is one of the biggest opportunities that I see today. And going back again, I love the fact about mindset, because I believe that everything starts with mindset with process equals to culture and strategy. And that leads finally to talent and technology. We get blinded by the sexiness of technology all the time. And I love tech. I've been building tech companies forever. But it isn't about the tech. It's about the mindset. That's the starting point. How I think about it is what happens on the other end of it. And I believe that this reset in mindset is going to be really interesting, because if you've noticed on a personal level, you probably have been connecting with people that you haven't connected with in a very long time, but you're connecting because you share a common affinity that got distorted. It got distorted because we got busy with a whole bunch of things that don't matter, right? We sit at home now for the last few months. We now think about, what should I eat? What should I not eat? What exercise should I do? What exercise should I not do? How should I spend my time? How should I not spend my time? These are the things that matter, ladies and gentlemen. These are the basics that we forgot about. And if we get that right, everything else works its way forward. That's how I see it. I think the leaders in many countries, okay, in all fairness, I'm going to have to be very fair on my comment here, Sultan. There's no blueprint and there was no warning sign. Huh? So there was no out of the procedure standard operations book that anyone could look at, in all fairness, okay? On the other side of the spectrum, it highlights how responsive, how open-minded, and how forward-thinking a leader or its leadership can really be. This story is still being written, and we're going to see it unveil in front of us, like I talked about, the awakening of the truth of where we are right now. We will see it happen, and I believe that there'll be a second wave. I think it's going up again because governments have rushed reopening. I understand the logic behind it. We want to get the economy going. But if all the people are sick and dead, how will you have an economy? An economy is built on me and you and everybody eating and consuming. We can't eat and consume. There's no economy. There's no need for technology even, right? Let's get healthy and keep safe.
Thank you, Nader. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll move now to the audience. We'd like to thank the panelists, first of all, and we'll move to the audience now, and we'll have questions from them. So I'll hand over the questions to Lorenzo. Lorenzo, please. Lorenzo is the CEO of Bold Consultancies. Please, Lorenzo, feel free to ask your questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much to everybody. It's really nice webinar, really interesting to hear all your point of view. It's really amazing. We have a lot of questions, actually. I will try to filter a little bit. The first question is for our friend Mohammed Al-Naki. You partially answered to one of our attendees, but I would like to raise a different question. So it's basically, during your speech, you were talking about wind power, solar panel power, but what is your opinion about what are exactly the next steps that governments and the private sector will have to do to support even disruptive innovation to promote this zero emission lifestyle? So what are we looking for? What are you waiting for?
So right now, we've since let's say the Paris Accord was signed a couple of years ago, we've seen a lot of the large oil and gas and energy companies and a lot of the governments around the world, they've signed up to that, and they put a target, whether to align with the United Nations in 2030 to reduce emissions by then, or in the long run. A lot of the oil and gas companies go out till 2050. They want to reach down to zero emissions. So if all of these companies, they've put huge amount of funds and they have huge plans, but everybody is still in the beginning of this journey. So, and it's not a short journey. So I don't, the 2030 is only 10 years from now, and 10 years will be over, because we all remember, 2010, it just seems like, just months ago, maybe not that far back. So the first 10 years will go by pretty fast. So if we look out at least the next 30 years till 2050, and we see these huge amount of funds. For example, BP has put in 100 million. Amazon is committed around 2 billion. So Total, etc., Equinor. So all these companies have put either hundreds of millions or billions towards this. But this is only the first starting step. The next step is to partner with governments, where governments will facilitate the policies, like you said, for these disruptive technologies, but to put them to good use, because all these things, as we remember, are funds. So the fund is there. And if you don't put it to good use, either you won't end up with a good technology to help reduce the carbon, or the money won't be used. It will just sit there in the fund. So this is the next challenge, which I see over the next 5 years, is to identify all these disruptive technologies. You're going to see a lot of new startups come out in the clean technology area because these funds are there. And it's going to take some ideas with some partnerships with the money. Now we know that the money is there and the aim is there. So, but you have to put them all together. And I think the next 5 years are going to be very interesting. And I think we will see progress, because this is the first step towards achieving that goal. So I think it's going to be an exciting couple of years ahead. Thanks, Lorenzo.
Thank you very much. Very, very clear and straightforward. Thank you very much. We have another question for Dr. Faris. So let me take it over here. So regarding, of course, what is happening and the situation now after this COVID-19 pandemic, do you think that the Middle East, with its global wealth, will invest in longer-term solution, or just will stay still in short-term trends?
Well, thank you very, very much for the question. Well, the Middle East is part of the world. We are not separated from the world. We have been affected by this crisis like everybody else. So definitely we got our share of, shall I say, of the problem, and then we will have to put our share in the solution of that. And be it, and I think the solutions, or shall I say, the efforts that were just described by Mr. Mohammed is one of the, shall I say, evidence of that. So definitely, I would say we will have to as Middle Eastern countries to invest and be, along with other countries of the world, in addressing this issue, be it in financial terms, technological terms, social, etc., and so on. Else we will be left behind. Because, and as we said, now I'm seizing the opportunity actually just to also to comment on a couple of other things. Because there was a general question about human capital to all of us. And I wanted just to comment that definitely in this new era of digital transformation, of new technologies, etc., most of our, we have to revisit our human capital, how we prepare, what kind of education, preparation capacities we provide to the younger men and women in our in the world, in this region, and in the world at large. And talking about the digital transformation, and maybe here I'm commenting on what Dr. Zaki just said. Definitely, when we say that we are moving in a dark, shall I say, jungle, etc., this doesn't mean that we should be stagnant. On the contrary, we keep on exploring. If you are in darkness, you try to light a candle. You try to find a solution. You try to find your way out of it all the time. So definitely innovation is, and trying to find new solutions is something, and that's what I meant and I emphasized of having, shall I say, this crisis management, how we manage our time, how we manage our resources in a dynamic manner that would allow us to be very responsive and very dynamic, and to capture and capitalize on opportunities as they emerge, not to be stagnant, because the old, shall I say, beliefs and, shall I say, approaches might always change. And about the digital era, the digital era is ultimately is fueled, and it's part of the technological and scientific advancement. So it cannot be separated from that. And that's why we say, and as you rightfully said later on, that we have to rely on the knowledge, we have to rely, but the digital transformation cannot be the whole story. It's a big part of this story, that's for sure, but it's not the whole story. And when I'm talking about science and technology, and here I'm trying to comment on, ultimately, as said by our colleague, Mr. Nader, we cannot go cultivate lands with a shovel. We can use technologies, but also I cannot cultivate land with digital transformation. Ultimately, there should be some tractor in the field or something to cultivate. And simply put, we need to eat. So, so basically, it's the issue of technologies that are appropriate, that meet, that how we optimize the use of the knowledge and technologies, including digital transformation, to reach, shall I say, to achieve our goals and meet our needs, be it in social, economic, and all other spheres of human activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your answer. We have another question here for our friend Nadir. You went through this topic, but this question is quite straight. We are talking about SMEs, that is including most of us and our close friends and entrepreneurs. So what is, in your opinion, the exact action plan with the SMEs they need to draw right now, not only for the survival, but also for their own growth? Because this is what the companies are looking for, the growth, not only to survive. Some attendees, they mentioned some business obstacles, like the increase of the VAT. So what is the action plan?
So I'll address it from a few angles. I mean, okay, so number one, I'm going to point out that there are two types of entrepreneurs that would run an SME. There's those who are voluntary and those who are non-voluntary, okay? The majority of the entrepreneurs that you see building these companies are voluntary entrepreneurs. What has changed is you're going to see a lot of involuntary entrepreneurs entering the space because they've lost their job. And it doesn't mean that entrepreneurship is wrong or bad for them, but they're going to be bringing a whole new flavor to the game. Okay, so it's really important to point that out as one of the rules that are changing. What SMEs really need right now, and SMEs are, I put it in this analogy, they're like a child. They need nurturing, like a child you have at home. And to do that, there are a few elements. One is the cost of operations for SMEs in a lot of countries is too high. The costs need to be reduced. On the other side, okay, there's a lot of new dynamic changes that are taking place. So I've seen people take advantage, entrepreneurs take advantage of shifting and pivoting their businesses at this time, right? They're completely resilient. They say, well, my business is like this. I see a new opportunity. I'm going to shift it like this, and I'm going to become more responsive. So now that isn't the majority of the SMEs or entrepreneurs that I've seen. That's a few of them. Most of them are suffering. They're not doing very well. And part of the equation is the government. The government needs to step in. They need to be very realistic about what is required to let these SMEs actually grow. Now, it is important to keep in mind as well, in this process, not every SME is going to survive, okay? As negative as that might sound, you will be building new serial entrepreneurs. They fail once, they try again, and they finally build something that actually works. So do not be discouraged if you're an entrepreneur and it's not working out. Should not be your last time if it's your first time. And if it's not your first time, you know exactly what to do again. You just repeat, press the reset button. But for that point, and I've seen, Dr. Zaki has mentioned this, and Dr. Ghaith and Mohammed has mentioned this also, where the government intervention is an important role. And I'm going to give you a really nasty example, if you don't mind me saying. At the beginning of this pandemic, I heard General Motors and the likes of looking for bailouts, okay? And they didn't receive it, okay? And I'm glad they didn't, okay? And these bailouts that go to these huge companies, man, you know how many SMEs they can fuel, that can change the world? Literally, that you can just pump money into these guys and get them moving, right? The process of entrepreneurship is you start, you try, you fail, you try, you fail, you keep going, and then you start over again and keep going until finally it works. It's an exhaustive process that requires a lot of nurturing to take place, and governments need to play a much more active role. They need to put money up. They literally need to put money up. They need to get the costs going down. They need to ensure the infrastructure that delivers services for startup companies to do their job. And finally, the last one that stings the most, regulations. The regulations in most countries are not SME friendly in reality. It is time to lower those barriers and let those SMEs do what they do best, of course, within the law, morally and ethically, but let them do their job because they're entrepreneurs. That's their job. Their job is to solve the world's problems. Using technology or not using technology, whatever it is that they do, they're there to solve those problems. Let them do their job.
Thank you very much, Nader. Perfect answer, because actually is directly connecting my next answer for Dr. Zaki, which is mainly related. And what exactly the governments has to do to maintain the private sector, and what is the timeline that they need to see? It's not here a matter of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Maybe there is a completely different vision here. So action and timeline from governments.
So there is, look, there are two fundamentals that we need to be aware of right now. One is that there is no single path to a solution or to solve where we are right now. So everything is possible right now. And the second thing is that what Dr. Faiz already indirectly referred to when he talked about the IP, the intellectual property, which is the notion of public good. So at a certain time, there is an intervention. We are very much aware right now. We revive our understanding of what is public good is. You don't have to be socialist in order to believe in public good right now. It's more acceptable. Even when Nader mentioned about the cluster leadership or micro leadership, which are the terms that evolving right now, it's basically a belief and a hidden belief that is embedded into our new understanding that there is a collective good for all of us to move together. And this is something that is very, very important because it will influence what the government next will do, will influence the behavior of the government. So no matter what the government will do, it has to be based on the two understanding that I mentioned right now. In order to address this notion of public good and the collective good for citizens and businesses and other, transparency needs to be a right by everyone, which means that anything that the government to do has to be transparent, end to end, to understand what is going on. I don't want really more uncertainty to predict as a businessman or as an SME or as a citizen or others, more than the uncertainty of the crisis itself. So this is a fundamental direction that we are taking. The second thing, which is no single path is there, which means that, again, but this time is more on the practical side, government, for the people who already study policy making, is that there are different approaches to governance. So we are not talking here about a top-down or bottom-up. We're talking here about an enabling role. No one will help the business community or private sector than the private sector itself. There are some measures on policy that needs to be taken to make their life easier by, for example, by slashing the cost of services in countries where there are taxes. So this needs to be eased for a certain direction. There is a kind of incentives that needs to be there to rebound such kind of companies or individuals or startup that needs to regenerate their innovation machine again. So this is really crucial. But the role, the directive role of government, other than this, will be in what I believe that this is a fundamental role, which is the investment in modern digital infrastructure and in capabilities. Again, we are underestimating the amount that this revolution happened recently in terms of the digital increase of digital demand. Okay, I'm talking here about services, Dr. Reis, not technology. I'm talking about digital services here. This is putting pressure, humongous pressure, 30% increase on consumption of data across the networks, almost double, let's say, the capacity of any networks that can take from a bandwidth perspective. I'm talking here about even the stability and the security. We didn't even mention how much cyber attacks happened during the last 3 months, which is unbelievable. It's basically, it increased almost 282% in the last 3 months. So this is not really a task that an individual or a company needs to take responsibility of, but a government needs really to play a fundamental role in helping here enormously, because of that there is a public good. There is a right that the citizen and businesses, they need really to get advantage and have value added coming from the responsibility that the government is playing. I'm not trying to be harsh on government, but I'm trying really to put the context right in order really to make sense out of the new, agile, and resilient enabling government that will be playing its fundamental role during the recovery path that we are trying really to address altogether.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your really clear answer. So I will give the last speech to our friend Sultan to the last information, and thank you everybody from our side and from Volt Management Consultants.
I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank the team, Elena, Nagish, Renz, Lorenzo, on putting this live. I'd like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Ghaith, Dr. Zaki, Nader, and Muhammad. It was a really informative session, thorough discussion, and I reached to a conclusion that human being and human capital is the main thing in this world. So without humans, you cannot do anything. Without humans, you cannot transform your technology, you cannot implement your technology. So as Nader mentioned, and as Dr. Ghaith mentioned, without humans, nothing can be implemented. No SDGs, no technologies, no future technologies, no going to the moon, not visiting other planets. So nothing will be developed unless we take care of ourselves. I'd like to thank all the participants who and the attendees who attended the webinar. And I'd like to address a point that all your questions will be answered by email due to the time constraint. Mr. Lorenzo will look at the questions and answer them one by one. And again, thanks everybody. We have our next session on the 20th of this month. It will focus on FDI in Vietnam and the shift from the international market towards Vietnam. Thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sultan, and thanks to all colleagues who participated. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure meeting everybody on the panel. Keep safe and keep well.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Same to you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Close host. Close the host. 30